This man cannot be killed by even the world's most venomous snakes. This bear fought in World War II. And this manhole cover accidentally went to space and is still up there now. How the heck is any of this true? Well, let's find out. Alongside the reason California recently declared bees are actually fish.
What?
And more insanity as we explore stories that sound fake but are 100% real. Among the most unbelievable things I've encountered in my many, many hours on the internet are the objects that have somehow ended up in people's bodies.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.
Now don't worry, we're not delving into anything but related today.
Inner peace.
But the objects Dr. Amaze is about to extract in front of you are still astonishingly bizarre. Kicking off our bodily adventure, an unbelievably cursed sight I wish I could erase from my eyes. But I had to see it, and now so do you. This is what happens when you forget to take out your contact lenses for over 2 months.
What?
No, there's more. Goodness, this is
How
one
many?
for the record. I don't know. There's actually a wall.
Oh, God.
There's a whole waddle there.
I believe it.
You're my Guinness Book of Record patient.
Oh, God.
We're
I'm
delivering
to be remembered.
octuplets.
This is bizarre.
You can say that again.
Oh my God, they just keep coming. It's horrifying, but I can't look away. The context is the woman in the clip was complaining about irritation in her eyes and blurry vision, so she visited her eye doctor. It was here she realized she'd been forgetting to remove her daily lenses, going to sleep, then putting an additional pair on in the morning. Results speak for themselves, and I can only apologize.
What the heck is going on here?
Moving rapidly on now, and what's that smell? That smell, it turns out, is something that has absolutely no right being up someone's nose. In 2020, headlines emerged about a man who'd somehow had a coin wedged up his snot box for an unbelievable 53 years. The unnamed 59-year-old Russian had wedged the 1 kopeck coin, worth about a cent at the time, up his right nostril when he was 6. It got stuck, but he was too scared to ask his strict mother for help. So he left it, eventually forgetting about it until half a century later, he grew completely unable to breathe through the nostril. A scan revealed the half-inch wide coin had only now become a problem because over the years, the man's immune system had deposited a layer of calcium and salts onto it, forming a thick crust. This is a natural response to foreign objects in the body and is meant to prevent infection, but instead prevented this guy from breathing altogether. Man, imagine the relief of that first breath without a piece of history up your schnoz. But as far as blocked noses, it doesn't get much more literal than a schnoz plugged up by a Lego block. When one Arizona resident was 6 years old, he'd popped a stud piece up his snot locker, and when his mom was neither able to locate or retrieve it, she assumed it had fallen out. It wasn't until after 26 years of mysterious congestion and sleep apnea that the now 32-year-old blew his nose, and out came the piece. This wasn't the only time Lego had caused bodily trouble. A few years back, one Scottish man began experiencing excruciating inner ear pain and hearing loss. Assuming it was an infection, he was prescribed antibiotics by his doctor, but they did nothing. It all came to a head, or an ear, late one night when he awoke to an astonishing surge of pressure in his ear canal. Fearing a gruesome rupture was imminent, he could do nothing but lay in bed enduring the pain until something small and hard suddenly popped out onto his pillow and he thought it was a chunk of his inner ear. But on inspection, he was gobsmacked to find it was a tiny pink Lego stud. The at the time 24-year-old noted that he hadn't played with Lego since he was about 5, meaning he'd been carrying the unwelcome plastic guest for almost 2 decades before his body decided it was ejection time.
I'm done saving you.
If that wasn't strange enough, wait till you hear the absolutely horrifying reason behind the severe headaches one 35-year-old Vietnamese man began experiencing back in 2023. The headaches had been worsening for him for a while, but things kicked up a notch when he went to scratch his nose one day and was shocked to find some kind of foreign object wedged up there. A CT scan revealed the astonishing truth. Up his nasal cavity, poking through his skull and into his brain, was a pair of chopsticks. How the Turns out, this fella had gotten blackout drunk a few months back and ended up in a bar fight. The next day, he vaguely remembered the fight, but didn't recall the crucial detail that his opponent had jabbed a pair of chopsticks up his nose. Frankly, he was lucky to be alive, and the semi-broken sticks were successfully removed from his brain, a part of the body which typically is best to keep free of utensils. That's enough unwanted insertions for now. Let's move on to an explosively unbelievable tale of a very different kind. The explosion of an atom bomb is a truly astonishing thing to witness. But what happens if you blow one up underground? This curious thought was the driving force behind one experiment that took place on July 26, 1957. An experiment which sent a very unexpected passenger on an express ride to the cosmos. This is the peculiar story of Operation Plum Bob's Pascal B test.
Say that again?
Operation Plum Bob, the sixth in a series of continental tests conducted by the Atomic Energy Commission to further our weapons development program.
The 1950s saw non-stop nuclear testing for the U.S. military. After the atom bomb's invention changed the world at the end of World War II, refining it immediately became a prime focus. Which takes us to a place that took the explosive brunt of testing these new innovations, the Nevada desert. As the 50s wore on, scientists became concerned about the nuclear fallout from extensive testing, so they decided it was time to shift some of them underground, where the blast could be slightly more contained. Their first underground nuclear test, codenamed Pascal A, unexpectedly yielded a blast about 50,000 times greater than expected. It shot a blast of fire hundreds of feet into the air from the mouth of the 500-foot deep open shaft the bomb was nestled in, as researchers hopped in their cars and sped away, fearing for their safety. But they returned, unharmed and undeterred. This time, for their Pascal B test, they used a 485-foot deep chamber, sealed off with a 4-inch thick steel cap, essentially an extra bulky manhole cover weighing almost a ton welded in place. The nuke itself was right at the bottom of the pit, attached to a harness with which they lowered it in. Suspended a couple hundred feet above it was a 5-foot thick concrete cylinder with a hole in the middle, through which diagnostic equipment in a lead-lined canister further up the shaft could record data about the blast. If the canister's elaborate shielding allowed it to survive, that is. When scientists flipped the detonator, hellfire was unleashed. The nuke detonated, instantly vaporizing much of the surrounding rock, creating a sizable cavity that would collapse into a crater in the following days like this. As molten rock pooled below, the blast also vaporized the 2-ton concrete cylinder dangling above, creating a jet of superheated gas that thundered upwards. This column of vaporized concrete, alongside the nuke's shockwave, is what the steel sealing cap had to contend with. I wouldn't want to be that guy. Several scientists involved correctly predicted the cap would be blown off the blast. While sadly the images have either been lost to time or remain classified, the high-speed camera array, which captured 1 frame per millisecond, was only able to snap a single image of the cap in the air above the chamber, before it disappeared up out of frame entirely. Using this, alongside with calculating the pressure inside of the blast chamber, researchers concluded the overblown manhole cover to be traveling at around 125,000 miles per hour. For reference, that's about 75 times the max speed of an F-15 fighter jet. This not only made it one of the fastest moving man-made objects ever, but even more excitingly, may have sent it all the way into space. The astonishing velocity of the cap was about 5 times what's required to escape the Earth's gravitational pull, meaning it was easily fast enough to have been shot out into the solar system. That is, if it survived the climb. You see, when you're a non-streamlined hunk of steel, like a manhole cover, getting propelled into the atmosphere at that speed is anything but a smooth ride. The gases of the atmosphere present a huge amount of friction, leading some scientists running calculations about this scenario to suggest this friction would have vaporized the steel before it reached space. But hope is not lost. Given there are so many variables involved, some scientists do believe it's conceivable a steel cap of this one's large mass and tremendous velocity may have reached space, where it could now be soaring along, bouncing off UFOs. I just hope the aliens don't consider this an act of war. Let's move on now. What's your favorite fish? Salmon? Tuna? Trout? Mine's bumblebees. Yeah, that's right. Bees are fish. At least they are in California. Here's how. Back in 2018, California faced an unexpected crisis. The state's bee populations were plummeting due to a combination of habitat loss, diseases, and excessive pesticide usage. 1 in 3 North American subspecies of these essential pollinators were found to be at threat. So, state courts stepped up in a truly bizarre and unexpected way. You see, under state law, protecting a vulnerable species usually entails designating it as endangered. Problem is, those protections don't usually extend to insects. As far as the law is concerned, insects are pretty much disposable, which makes it easy for farmers to use pesticides to keep them away from crops. And sure, that's fine and dandy now, but if bees disappear, pollinating said crops in the future becomes a serious issue. So, how do you protect an essentially unprotectable creature? Well, you look to the seas, where you'll find some very important and very soggy legal documents.
Are you sure about that?
To get specific, Section 45 of California's Fish and Game Code defines fish as wild fish, mollusk, crustacean, invertebrate, or amphibian. You, like me, might be surprised by a few of those. You probably never considered a crab or a frog to be a fish, for example. But there they are, defined on the list. So, legal teams interested in protecting bees honed in on one word in the code, invertebrate, meaning animals with no backbone. They pointed out how invertebrates like the Trinity bristle snails you see here, which spend much of their time on land, are protected under, fish law. And if these snails could be legally recognized as fish, then several at-risk bumblebee species as invertebrates should also hereby be recognized as fish. Order in the court, please. Legal teams representing the interests of agriculture groups, including the California Association of Pest Control Advisors, shockingly weren't on board.
Bees?
These lobby groups argued that the whole claim was ridiculous. And sure, they might have been technically correct. It was a crazy claim. But the lobbyists' motivations of protecting short-term profits and shareholder interests ahead of the survival of bumblebee species, and in the long term, the pollen-dependent ecosystem as a whole, were pretty clear. The judges seemingly sniffed this vested interest out too, because after several years of legal back and forth, they actually sided with the environmentalist teams. And so, 4 subspecies of bumblebee were awarded with a new California-only status as fish.
That is me. I swear to God, that's me.
For the unbelievable story up next, I'm gonna have to issue a warning. For the love of God, please do not attempt to replicate even the slightest hint of this upcoming insanity at home. With that out of the way, I'm gonna tell you about a man with a seriously dangerous hobby. This is Tim Freedy, and he spends his time getting bitten by the world's most venomous snakes, on purpose. For almost 20 years, Mr. Freedy, a 57-year-old truck mechanic and snake collector from Wisconsin, has been injecting himself with venom in an effort to, counterintuitively, alleviate some of the serious risk associated with his snake-keeping hobby. He essentially asked himself, is it possible to become immune through repeated exposure to these bites? The answer, after years of shocking self-experimentation, has ended up changing the world. It all started with injecting small amounts of relatively mild venom at spaced-out intervals. Tim said he completely screwed up early on after 2 cobra bites in quick succession left him in a 4-day coma. Unfazed, he continued progress, albeit at a cautious, slow and steady pace. The dose, potency, and regularity gradually increased over the years, eventually allowing Tim to withstand bites that would kill the average person, including bites from rattlesnakes, black mambas, and taipans. Tim's growing immunity eventually caught the interest of immunologist Dr. Jacob Glanville, and they began working together to create a universal antivenom. Usually, antivenoms are produced by injecting venom into animals and harvesting the antibodies they produce. Antibodies are proteins produced by the immune system to fight off foreign objects, like viruses or the toxins in venom. But unfortunately, these antibodies are always super specific to individual types of toxin. What they discovered with the antibodies Tim had built up, by contrast, was that they defended against a massive range of toxins. So, when they combined Tim's antibodies with existing drugs, the results were astonishing. Researchers found that by using this antibody cocktail, lab mice were able to survive a usually fatal dose of venom from 13 of 19 species of venomous snake tested, with partial effectiveness against the rest. While the antibody cocktail doesn't yet show effectiveness against all types of venom toxin, it's a massively promising start. Researchers even theorize it may already be effective against rarer snake bites, for which there's currently no official specific antivenom. 140,000 people a year die from snake bites, and countless more suffer life-changing injuries, many of which due to lack of the correct antivenoms being accessible in time. So it's clear to see how useful a generalized antivenom could be. While Tim sustained his last venom bite back in 2018, the research on his blood continues, and will inevitably save thousands of lives once the antivenom comes to market. While we wait though, let's all leave this stuff in Tim's hands rather than testing on our own, shall we? But on that slithering topic, who's got faster reaction times, snakes or cats? Well, to find out, you'll have to buy our game, Nuh-uh. Only joking. The answer is cats, with an approximate reaction time of 20 to 70 milliseconds versus a snake's reaction time of 40 to 80 milliseconds. If you found that interesting, you'll love our trivia game. It's full of all of our most interesting facts. Click the link in the description or on the screen now to order your copy today. Now, back to the video. Let's step back in time now for one of the most unbelievable animal stories I've ever come across. In the throes of the Second World War, the Polish army were joined by a rather unlikely comrade, a 6-foot-tall, 440-pound adult Syrian brown bear. This animal earned himself a rightful spot as one of history's most fearsome war heroes. While traveling through Iran in 1942, the 2nd Polish Corps encountered a little boy carrying a sack which looked suspiciously alive? The boy proudly presented its contents, a tiny bear cub. One of the accompanying Polish civilians, 18-year-old Irina Bokiewicz, was so smitten by the cub that she convinced the Corps to take him in. In August of that year, the cub was given to the Polish 22nd Artillery Supply Company, after becoming an official member, where he received his very own Polish name, Wojtek, which translates as joyous soldier. At first, the energetic young bear couldn't help but get himself into trouble. When the Polish army came to prepare for their traditional Christmas Eve feast, they discovered that Wojtek had got into the food store first. Wojtek more than redeemed himself the following year when he alerted his comrades to the presence of a spy in their camp. One evening, he unwittingly disturbed a man who had sneaked into camp to try and steal some ammunition. The man, who was later revealed to be a local opponent of British rule, shrieked in terror at the sight of Wojtek. The piercing sound alerted the rest of the men to his presence, and he was swiftly arrested. Wojtek was awarded with 2 bottles of beer and unlimited shower time, and his comrades started to realize what an asset this bear could really be. Wojtek picked up some surprisingly human-like habits as he grew up surrounded by surly soldiers. As a cub, he would drink milk from an old vodka bottle, and would later develop a taste for the hard stuff too. Wojtek would frequently drink the rest of the men under the table, guzzling beer and wine as if it was water. And considering he weighed 440 pounds as an adult, it was virtually impossible for him to get drunk, which was probably for the best. Perhaps Wojtek's weirdest and most unhealthy habit was his penchant for cigarettes. But he wouldn't just smoke them, he'd eat them too. According to legend, he would turn his nose up at a cigarette unless it was lit, in which case he would take a single puff puff before gobbling it down. Wojtek became a source of joy and light entertainment during these trying times. Having Wojtek around was considered a great psychological relief, and he would often wrestle with the soldiers and even learned to salute whenever he was greeted by his company men. Just like an excitable puppy, he would also chase after the oranges the soldiers threw as part of their grenade practice. In 1943, the army unit prepared to join the Allied campaign against Italy. Without thinking twice, the Poles took Wojtek with them. But when they arrived, British officials at the port refused to let the bear board the ship because he wasn't officially part of the army. Not to mention he was fundamentally still potentially a man-eating wild animal. But the Poles weren't deterred. In a bizarre twist, the soldiers decided to make Wojtek a private of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company right there and then. The men gave the bear an official rank, service number, and even a paybook to legitimize his soldier status. Wojtek was allowed to join his comrades on the Italy-bound vessel. Whew. When the soldiers re-entered the war zone in 1944, they were thrown headlong into the Battle of Monte Cassino, one of the most brutal chapters of the Second World War. When they arrived, Wojtek was initially terrified by the noise of the battlefield and scampered up a tree. But as he watched his comrades at work, he finally came down and started to assist them. The bear mimicked the soldiers as they carried crates of artillery shells across the dangerous terrain. Wojtek carried boxes that usually required the strength of 4 men with ease, and would stack them onto a truck or other ammunition boxes. Each crate weighed around 100 pounds and contained 25-pound artillery shells, yet Wojtek never dropped a single one. The whole idea might seem like something out of a fantasy, but there's at least one account of a British soldier being totally blindsided to see a hulking 6-foot bear carrying artillery shells across the battlefield. On May 18, 1944, the Polish Second Corps captured the seemingly impenetrably and strategically vital mountain fortress of Monte Cassino from the Axis powers, marking their victory. Wojtek not only survived the brutal conflict, but his contribution was considered so vital to their overall success that the Polish High Command decided to make the bear an official emblem of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. The official patch shows the bear carrying a shell with ease, just as he'd done on the battlefield. When the war drew to a close, Wojtek was given to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he was a beloved attraction for visitors from far and wide. Wojtek the soldier bear eventually died in December of 1963 at the ripe old age of 21. A true war hero, and a furry-us one at that. Let's move on to something a lot darker and more serious now, but no less bizarre. In times of global crisis, acts carried out in the name of defending a homeland can slide into total insanity. For those in the North American continent in the mid-20th century, that insanity took the form of disturbing experiments carried out by governments upon their own people. Fair warning, folks. After hearing this, your understanding and trust in the government might never be the same. In the 1950s and 60s, the Western world was gripped with fear about the spread of communism via the Soviet Union. The CIA in particular were concerned about rumors that the Soviets had developed mind control technologies. If true, these posed obvious threats to democracy, ranging from general brainwashing to the ability to break individuals, forcing them to spill state secrets. Not wanting to be one-upped, the CIA frantically began trying to figure it out for themselves, using disturbing methods and chemical persuasion to try to unravel the human mind. Beginning in the early 1950s, this overarching secret project was launched under the name MK Ultra. Unfortunately, public info about MK Ultra is quite sparse, since the CIA director in 1973, Richard Helms, ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed just before significant internal investigations were launched. Not suspicious at all, Richard. What we do know comes from surviving CIA financial records, internal documents, testimony of CIA officials, and first-hand accounts recorded in court transcripts transcripts and media interviews. From the surviving material, we know that MKUltra had 149 sub-projects, including one particularly disturbing venture, Sub-Project 68. This program took place at Allen Memorial Institute Psychiatric Hospital in Montreal's McGill University campus, a place mentally ill folk would have gone hoping to get better. Instead, what they experienced there was a fully fledged nightmare. Between 1957 and 1964, under the leadership of Dr. Donald Ewin Cameron, the Institute ran more than 100 experiments on around 50 subjects suffering from ailments like schizophrenia and depression. The doctor's self-pioneered treatment plan consisted largely of two stages: depatterning and repatterning. Together, these were intended to forcefully break a patient's patterns of behavior, thoughts, and identity, and replace what came before with something new, hopefully ditching any undesirable mental issues in the process. The depatterning stage lasted several weeks, and what happened within that time would be enough to drive anyone mad. Cameron primarily used electroshock therapy, far above the frequency considered safe today, as he hoped to hard reset any connections in the patient's brain synapses that might have been causing problems. This would often be followed up by placing the patient in a medically induced coma, which Cameron thought would prevent them from resisting treatment and avoid unwanted psychological patterns re-emerging. By ensuring their only waking moments were spent actively being treated, Cameron theorized there was no room for them to even consider slipping back into their old patterns. To add to this detachment from their regular world, patients were also placed into sensory isolation chambers, dark, windowless, ultra-quiet rooms where their hearing, vision, and sometimes movement were heavily restricted. The disorienting effect would have been similar to the sensory deprivation tanks of today, except the patients certainly weren't there for relaxation or enjoyment. It was in this state of utter confusion that Cameron sought to rebuild a more desirable inner psyche by effectively wiping the slate clean. To achieve this, the doctor would blast patients with messages played either through loudspeakers or headphones for up to 16 hours a day. The same messages would be repeated constantly, with the patient in varying levels of sedation. The first batch were negative, consisting of phrases catered to each patient's specific identity issues. Phrases like, "You are worthless," "You are incapable of love," and "Your mother never loved you" were commonplace. This was coupled with continued sensory deprivation, induced coma, and the usage of drugs to induce temporary paralysis, alongside other chemicals like certain recently discovered highly potent psychoactive compounds.
I remember them telling me that I was getting smaller and smaller, and I really felt myself getting smaller. And they were bringing me back in time, way back, At one point, I almost felt like I was just about to be born, really, that far back in memory. And they were really probing, asking all kinds of questions, and I felt I didn't have any control. I had to answer. I didn't feel I had any control. I was completely, like they had complete control over me.
The idea was to induce a complete mental breakdown, where any preconceived ideas the patient held about themselves, and even their core sense of who they were, would reach a crisis, from which Cameron began implanting new ideas of self. And this is where the second batch of messages came in. This batch constituted the repatterning stage, which likewise lasted a number of weeks. Here, messages were still played for hours at a time, but instead consisted of positive reinforcement. You are loved. You can overcome this. You are capable of great things. If it worked, this would ideally reprogram the patient into a functioning member of society, but here's the kicker. The results were largely horrendously bad because, spoiler alert, it turns out treating a person like Cameron did during the first stage of negative messaging can often be impossible to counteract, no matter how many nice things you later go on to say. The doctor's reports claimed that the treatment plans had seen success, but widespread condemnation from from patients and their families in the years that followed tell a very different story. Patients suffered permanent effects, including memory loss, loss of basic life skills, incontinence, insomnia, PTSD, and intense anxiety, to name just a few, with many left worse than when they had arrived. One participant, Jean Steele, emerged with childlike behaviors, and in the aftermath would sit writing gibberish on her walls. Her daughter said the treatments took away her mom's soul. Legal teams working on behalf of the patients in later decades argued that while most were not necessarily held there against their will, many of the patients had been unable to give informed consent to any of these extreme procedures. Most had come seeking help for relatively common issues like anxiety or postpartum depression, not knowing they'd be used as guinea pigs for an experimental method that would never be scientifically proven and soon fell out of favor. Dr. Cameron, however, right up until his ticker gave out in 1967, firmly believed that by erasing existing thought and behavior patterns, essentially reducing an adult to an infant-like state and then forcing new messages into the mind, he could completely rebuild a person's psyche. And given that Cameron became president of the World Psychiatric Association in 1961, following on from already having headed both the American and Canadian psychiatric associations, he was at the time arguably the most respected figure in North American psychiatry. The fact that the CIA funneled the equivalent in today's dollars of $660,000 to him through a shell organization, and the Canadian government propped up the project with an additional $4 million, adjusted for inflation, all goes to show how much faith they had in his methods. Well, either that, or it shows just how little regard those government entities had for the well-being of their own people. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Let's take our adventure onto the high seas of World War II now, where a fellow by the name of Poon Lim lived through the impossible. On November 23, 1942, the British merchant steamer ship SS Ben Lomond was ambushed by a German U-boat in the South Atlantic, 750 miles east of Brazil. 2 torpedoes ripped into its belly, sinking the vessel within 2 minutes and dragging most on board, a mix of Chinese crewmen and British officers, down with it. Due to the astonishing speed and devastating damage of the attack, there was little time to react, and Poon Lim, a 24-year-old hired from Hainan, China, was left the sole survivor. After a couple hours floating with his life jacket in the open ocean, Poon spotted an intact 8-foot life raft from the wreckage floating nearby, and couldn't believe his luck when he clambered aboard. It was stocked with supplies, including a 10-gallon water container, cans of hardtack biscuits and dried meat, evaporated milk, sugar, chocolate, lime juice, a flashlight, smoke pots used for signaling, and flares. It was a godsend, but it wouldn't last forever, and Poon's seafaring journey would indeed be hellishly long. After 55 days of careful rationing, including the occasional sip of lime juice to fend off scurvy, Poon's supplies ran out, forcing him to get creative. He started collecting rainwater using a canvas tarp, fashioned into a canopy, which also provided much-needed shelter from the brutal sun. He made a basic fishing hook using a spring from a flashlight and pairing it with some unraveled hemp rope and hardtack as bait. He began catching small fish. He used these as bait to catch larger fish, which in turn required fashioning a sturdier fishing hook using a nail from the raft. These fish were big enough to fill his belly after gutting them with knives made from food cans. From this, he established an effective, if precarious, system of survival. But the biggest threat to his system was the weather. While most days were unbearably hot, when January rolled around, Poon weathered a fierce storm that nearly upended his raft. In the process, his precious stored water and fish supplies were lost overboard, forcing him to start from scratch. This left him severely dehydrated, and growing weak and lightheaded, he was forced to acquire fluids through the only available method, a disturbing one at that. He began catching seabirds and drinking their blood. Disgusting as it seems, it was better than the agonizing dryness and dehydration. Besides, alongside fish, the birds provided decent food, and for all the animals he caught, he made sure to save some strips of meat to dry out, forming jerky that he could depend on in scarcer times. But Poon's makeshift butcher shop, with its pungent offal and blood, soon began attracting unwanted attention. By February, a group of sharks regularly circled the craft. However, this gave Poon an outlandish idea. He reinforced his fishing line double thick and cast it overboard with a chunk of meat attached. While he waited for a bite, he wrapped his hands with canvas for protection and grip. Eventually, a 5-foot shark took the bait, and with a mighty heave, Poon hauled the beast aboard. As the shark snapped and thrashed violently, Poon grabbed his metal water container and clubbed the shark to death in a furious struggle. He butchered the shark, eating what meat he could and slicing off the fins to dry in the sun, which he viewed as a delicacy. Such an achievement was a huge morale boost, and a much-needed one as he approached 4 months adrift. Estimating the time passing by the phases of the moon, hope for Poon was becoming a rapidly dwindling resource. As March came and went, Poon continued drifting westward. Once or twice, he spotted distant ships on the horizon and would use his flares, waving frantically to no avail. One American patrol plane did notice him and dropped a marker buoy in the water to indicate his position. Devastatingly, a storm rolled in, and by the time a rescue attempt could be organized, Poon's raft had been blown too far off course to be located. As April 1943 came into sight, however, so did something that made Poon Lim's heart skip a beat. There was green stuff floating in the water. Huh? Well, Mr. Lim was well versed in sea travel and knew floating vegetation meant only one thing. He was getting close to shore. He was soon proven right, and after 133 days drifting well over 700 miles, he was at last rescued by Brazilian fishermen. On his very grateful return to solid ground, Poon was surprised to find he'd only lost about 20 pounds of body weight, a testament to how effective his self-reliant survival methods had been, given the circumstances. After a few weeks' recovery, once he was declared fit to travel, he was transported to Britain for debriefing. He had, after all, been the sole surviving employee of a sunk British Empire merchant vessel. They likely had a few questions for him. When he recounted his tale, he was met with astonishment and reverence, and word reached the British King George VI himself. In July 1943, the king awarded Poon Lim the British Empire Medal for exceptional courage, fortitude, and resource in overcoming tremendous difficulties during his long ordeal. And I'd say he deserved it, wouldn't you? Up next, we have an individual whose entire life story is absolutely unbelievable, with 2 particular chapters taking things into the extreme. Usually becoming president of the USA is enough extraordinary activity for one person, but for Theodore Roosevelt, it was far from the most unusual thing about him. You see, during his presidency, Roosevelt's famous eccentricities ended up turning the White House into a zoo. Now, that's not a joke about politicians being animals either. Teddy R and his family were huge animal enthusiasts and filled the halls and gardens of the presidential home with wild beasts. Aside from a fairly standard, if sizable gang of pet dogs, cats, and rabbits, the Roosevelt menagerie expanded out to include, now let me get a breath here, 8 horses, 2 kangaroo rats, a flying squirrel, a one-legged rooster, a guinea pig called Fighting Bob Evans, a bright blue hyacinth macaw called Eli Yale, 2 other parrots, a barn owl, a lizard named Bill, a snake called Emily Spinach, and 4 other snakes, which Teddy's young son once let loose during a political meeting in the Oval Office, causing a minor panic. Now that might sound like a lot, but those are just the relatively normal pets. The weirder animal companions included Jonathan Edwards, the baby black bear who roamed the White House halls and inevitably grew into an adult black bear and had to be moved away. A playful coyote cub which escaped its crate and caused havoc around the White House offices. An ill-tempered badger named Josiah who was eventually carted off to the Bronx Zoo after taking up a habit of chasing guests around the White House lawn and biting their legs. Now, many of these animals came as gifts to the family from those who supported the president. A lion called Joe, for example, was sent as a gift from the Emperor of Ethiopia and resided in the National Zoological Park nearby the White House. The Emperor also gifted the Roosevelts 2 ostriches, a zebra, and Bill the hyena, who would often be seen begging for scraps from the family dinner table. Roosevelt wasn't a fan of the hyena, though, describing it as cowardly. before likewise shipping him off to the DC's Zoological Park. Most of the animals, though, Roosevelt seemed to adore, and all in, during his presidency, he had over 40 pets. This wasn't the only incredibly unusual aspect of his career, though. One other oddball moment saw Roosevelt's self-determination combined with his insane luck, leading to one of the most unbelievable scenarios in American history. On October 14, 1912, Roosevelt was running for an unprecedented third-term presidency, this time as part of an all-new progressive party nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. On this fateful day, a piece of paper would save the president's life. Now, let me explain. At around 8 o'clock in the evening, Roosevelt was leaving the Gilpatrick Hotel in Milwaukee, about to be driven to the Milwaukee Auditorium to deliver a speech. Entering his open-top car, he stood up and waved at a crowd that had gathered in the street, but then flash and an unmistakable noise. Roosevelt had been pinged at close range by a revolver-wielding maniac just 5 feet away. Within moments, the perpetrator had been restrained and disarmed, but while the crowd frenzied against the attacker, with chants of "kill him" filling the air, Roosevelt himself was unbelievably calm and collected. Standing tall, he ordered the crowd to quiet down before asking the would-be assassin to be brought to him. With the assailant now before him, Roosevelt looked him in the eye and simply asked, "What did you do it for?" The man stayed wild-eyed and silent, so Roosevelt requested the police take him away without hurting him. The man's name was John Schrank. He was an ex-New York City saloon keeper whose pockets were so stuffed with odd handwritten notes, experts think he probably had paranoid schizophrenia. In court, Schrank later confessed he believed the ghost of President William McKinley had directed him to kill Roosevelt, and accordingly the assailant spent the rest of his days in a hospital for the criminally insane. But returning to the day in question, Roosevelt resisted offers to take him to the hospital, instead insisting his people drive him to the auditorium. Now, though appearing unharmed, Roosevelt had indeed been shot in the chest. However, as an avid hunter, he knew that an animal expels the old red stuff through its mouth when the bullet pierces its lungs, and he was spitting clear as ever, so he was confident he wasn't seriously wounded. So without hesitation, and despite protest from concerned associates, he marched to the auditorium stage and announced,
"Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot."
He unbuttoned his jacket to reveal the growing stain on his shirt before proclaiming,
"It takes more than that to kill a bull moose."
He finished his introduction by saying,
"The bullet is in me now, so I cannot make a very long speech, but I will try my best."
He spoke for 90 minutes. Once he'd finally finished, Roosevelt made his way to the hospital where he was x-rayed, revealing that the bullet was lodged deep inside him and had come to a stop on an intercept route with his heart. Had he not had his folded-over 50-page speech, steel-reinforced glasses case, and a thick coat, the bullet would have likely killed him. With these items absorbing much of the impact, the bullet was slowed, and its overall energy was reduced, making it significantly less destructive. Doctors, however, decided surgery would be too risky, so they left the bullet inside him. Roosevelt would live with that bullet until 1919, where at 60 years old, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. Speaking on Roosevelt's death, politician Thomas R. Marshall said it right when he concluded that death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight. What a badass.